Hillary Clinton walked into that CNN town hall thinking a Louisiana country lawyer would be easy pickings. She forgot that Southern gentlemen keep receipts in their tackle boxes, and Senator Kennedy had been fishing in Clinton waters for 30 years. CNN had billed it as America's Future, Leadership and Integrity Debate. They'd chosen a diverse audience, half Democrats, who'd nod approvingly at Hillary's rehearsed lines about fighting for families, half Republicans, who'd come to see if the Louisiana senator, known for his folksy destruction of political correctness, could do to Hillary what he'd done to countless Biden appointees in confirmation hearings. Hillary arrived in her signature pantsuit, this one a shade of blue that probably cost what Kennedy's pickup truck was worth. She had that practiced smile, the one she deploys when she thinks she's in friendly territory. CNN was supposed to be safe. Anderson Cooper was moderating. The audience had been carefully selected. She was ready to discuss her experience, her service, and maybe take a few gentle swipes at Trump to remind everyone why she should still be relevant. What she didn't anticipate was that Senator John Kennedy doesn't do gentle. He walked onto the stage looking exactly like what he is, a 72-year-old man who could be someone's charming grandfather. If that grandfather happened to have graduated magna cum laude from Vanderbilt, first in his class from Oxford, and from the University of Virginia School of Law. He wore a rumpled suit that looked like he'd pulled it from the back of his closet. His reading glasses perched on his nose, carrying a yellow legal pad covered in his distinctive handwriting. He settled into his chair with the unhurried ease of someone who'd spent his whole life in Louisiana, where nobody rushes and everybody's polite, right up until they tell you exactly why you're wrong in the friendliest way imaginable. He nodded to Hillary with genuine Southern courtesy, the kind that says, "I'm going to destroy you, but I'm going to be real nice about it." Anderson Cooper opened with a question about public service and leadership, a softball designed to let Hillary tout her resume. She launched into her standard spiel about her decades of fighting for families, her work as First Lady, as Senator, as Secretary of State. Kennedy let her finish. Then he leaned forward with that "aw shucks" expression that makes people underestimate him right before he ruins their day. "Madam Secretary," he said in that slow Louisiana drawl that makes every word sound like it's being served with sweet tea and cornbread. "I appreciate that sentiment. Truly, I do. Public service is noble work. But I'm confused about something, and maybe you can help me understand it, because I'm just a simple country lawyer, and sometimes these complicated financial matters go over my head." He adjusted his glasses and consulted his legal pad. "You and President Clinton left the White House in 2001. You said y'all were dead broke. That's a direct quote, ma'am. Dead broke. Now, according to Forbes and other folks who track these things, y'all are worth somewhere north of $120 million. That's a lot of money for people who've spent most of their lives in government service." Kennedy looked up with those friendly eyes that suddenly weren't so friendly. "Now, I've been in the Senate for a while. I make a good salary, $174,000 a year, same as you did. But I'm still driving a 2008 Ford pickup with 186,000 miles on it. So I'm trying to figure out, how does government service make someone $120 million? Could you walk me through that math? Because if there's a trick to it, I'd like to tell my constituents who are working 2 jobs just to pay their light bill." The audience laughed. Hillary's smile froze like someone had paused a video mid-frame, and in that moment, she realized she'd made a terrible mistake agreeing to this. What happened next was a masterclass in Southern fried truth-telling. Hillary thought she'd faced tough questions before: Republican committees, Fox News debate stages, but she'd never met someone who could destroy you while sounding like he was just asking directions to the nearest Piggly Wiggly. If you think I'm exaggerating, you haven't seen what a Louisiana lawyer with an Oxford degree and a tackle box full of receipts can do to 30 years of Clinton scandals. Facts don't care about your pantsuit or your resume. And Senator Kennedy brought all the facts, delivered with a smile. Anderson Cooper tried to steer towards safer topics. Kennedy wasn't having it. Secretary Clinton, before we move on, I need to discuss something that's been bothering me for years. It's about Benghazi. Now, I know you're tired of talking about it. You've made that real clear. But see, ma'am, I'm from Louisiana. We had Hurricane Katrina. When people died on our government's watch, we wanted answers. We didn't think those questions were inconvenient. We thought they were owed to the families. He flipped a page on his legal pad. September 11th, 2012. 4 Americans died in Benghazi, Libya. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, Glenn Doherty. You were Secretary of State, in charge of their security, in charge of the response. Now, here's what I can't square. Kennedy pulled out printed emails. He'd actually printed them out, old-school style. At 11:12 p.m. that night, about 2 hours after the attack started, you sent an email to your daughter Chelsea. Of course, you didn't use her real name in the email. You used Diane Reynolds, which I find curious, but that's another matter. In that email, you wrote, 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an Al-Qaeda-like group. He looked up over his reading glasses. Al-Qaeda-like group. That's what you told your daughter that very night. Then the next morning, you had a phone call with the Egyptian Prime Minister. The notes from that call say you told him, "We know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest." Kennedy set down the papers. So, ma'am, help me understand. Help me. You told your daughter it was terrorism. You told Egypt's Prime Minister it wasn't about a video. But then, for the next 2 weeks, you and your administration told the American people, and more importantly, you told the families of those dead Americans, that it was all about a YouTube video that nobody had ever heard of. He pulled out more documents. Pat Smith, mother of Sean Smith, she says you looked her in the eye at her son's coffin and told her it was the video's fault. You told her they'd arrest the filmmaker. Charles Woods, father of Tyrone Woods, wrote in his diary what you said. We are going to have the filmmaker arrested. You blamed a filmmaker for your failures, ma'am. Hillary started to respond. Kennedy held up a gentle hand, polite but firm. Now, I'm not done. Susan Rice. She worked for you, answered to you, went on 5 Sunday morning shows and blamed the video. Who gave her those talking points? You did. Your State Department did. And we know from emails that you knew those talking points were false when you approved them. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. So here's my question, and I'm asking it as simply as I know how. You told your daughter the truth. You told foreign leaders the truth. But you told grieving American families a lie. Why? Was it because it was 2 months before the 2012 election and the Obama administration was running on Al-Qaeda is on the run? Was it politically inconvenient to admit Al-Qaeda had killed 4 Americans on September 11th on your watch? He looked at her with those friendly eyes that had gone very cold. Because, ma'am, where I come from, when you lie to a mother at her son's funeral, that's not a political strategy. That's just evil. And I need to know, at what point did you decide those families deserved lies instead of truth? Hillary's voice was tight. The situation was fluid. Intelligence was evolving. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted gently, your emails prove you knew the truth from the first night. That's not evolving intelligence. That's calculated deception. You knew, and you lied to grieving families at coffins. That's not fog of war. That's fog of politics. and 4 Americans are still dead because you denied them security beforehand and then lied about why they died afterward. He consulted his pad again. Ambassador Stevens sent multiple requests for additional security in the months before the attack. Your State Department denied them. The CIA team on the ground later testified they were told to stand down. Military assets were available. They weren't deployed until it was too late. Kennedy looked up. You were in charge of all of that. The security that wasn't provided. The rescue that didn't come. The lies that followed. And when Congress asked you about it, you said, and I remember this real clear, "What difference does it make?" He shook his head slowly. Ma'am, it makes all the difference in the world. It's the difference between a public servant and someone who puts politics over American lives. And you chose politics. The audience was dead silent. Hillary opened her mouth twice and closed it both times. Anderson Cooper tried to jump in. Kennedy just smiled that Southern smile and said, "Oh, we're just getting started." And folks, Kennedy was just warming up. He was still being polite. Share this if you remember those families. Kennedy didn't wait for the next question. He just transitioned seamlessly, the way a good storyteller does. While we're discussing truth and transparency, let's talk about your email server. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm not real good with computers. I still use a flip phone. Drives my staff absolutely crazy. But even I know you're not supposed to run the State Department's business through a server in your basement. So, help me understand. Did you not know that was wrong? Or did you know and just not care? He flipped through his legal pad. See, when you became Secretary of State, you signed documents, I've got copies here, acknowledging that you understood how to handle classified information. You took training. You knew the rules. But instead of using the government's secure email system, you set up a private server at your house in Chappaqua, New York. Kennedy looked up. Now, some folks might think that's convenient. But, ma'am, the only reason to do that is to avoid oversight. Government emails are subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. Government emails are archived. Government emails can be subpoenaed. But private server emails, well, those are under your control. You decide what people see. That's not convenience. That's concealment. He pulled out FBI reports. The FBI investigated, had to, once this became public. They found that you sent and received 110 emails containing classified information. 8 of those chains contained top-secret information. That's the highest classification level we've got. And you were running it through a server in your basement that wasn't protected by government security. But here's where it gets interesting, Kennedy said, his drawl getting a little more pronounced. March 2015, the story breaks. The House Select Committee on Benghazi issues a subpoena for all your emails. That's a legal order, ma'am. A subpoena means you have to preserve and produce the evidence. He looked at her over his glasses. 3 weeks later, your attorney and your aide sort through your emails and decide unilaterally, without oversight, that 30,000 of them are personal. About Yoga and Chelsea's wedding, you said. Then your IT specialist takes those 33,000 emails and deletes them using software called BleachBit. Kennedy paused for effect. Now I had to look up what BleachBit does. It's software specifically designed to permanently erase data so it can't be recovered. It doesn't just delete files. It overwrites them multiple times with random data. That's not cleaning out your inbox, ma'am. That's destroying evidence, and you did it after receiving a congressional subpoena. He held up another document. The FBI also found that you and your staff destroyed 13 mobile devices that had been used to access the server. How'd you destroy them? According to the FBI report, Some were broken with hammers. Hammers, ma'am. Like you were trying to kill them. Kennedy sat back. Now, let me tell you what would happen if I did that. If I set up a private server to avoid oversight, conducted government business on it, got subpoenaed, deleted 33,000 documents, used special software to make them unrecoverable, and smashed my phones with hammers, I'd be in federal prison. If any of my constituents did that, they'd be prosecuted so fast it would make your head spin. He looked at her steadily. But you, FBI Director Comey went on TV and said you were extremely careless, which, by the way, is functionally identical to the legal standard of gross negligence that would have made this a crime. But then he said, no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. That's not a legal standard, ma'am. That's a political decision. Hillary tried to defend herself. The FBI conducted a thorough investigation and cleared me. Ma'am, Kennedy said gently but firmly, the FBI said you broke the law, but they wouldn't charge you. That's not being cleared. That's being protected. And I think the American people can tell the difference. He gathered his papers. You set up a private server to avoid oversight. You put classified information at risk. When caught, you destroyed evidence. You lied about it repeatedly. Said you never sent classified information, then said nothing was marked classified, then said you didn't know what classified markings meant. Every statement was proven false, but you faced no consequences because your name is Clinton. Kennedy leaned forward. Ma'am, I'm from Louisiana. We've had some corrupt politicians. Edwin Edwards went to prison, but even he never destroyed evidence with bleach bit and hammers. That's a special level of contempt for the law. And you want us to think you should have been president? 2 rounds in, Hillary's famous composure was cracking. Kennedy was just getting started. Kennedy shifted gears with the ease of someone who'd been prosecuting cases for decades before he ever ran for office. Now let's discuss the Clinton Foundation. I think charity work is wonderful. I truly do. My church back home raises money for missions, helps people in need. Good work. But your foundation is interesting. See, it seems like everyone who donated big money to the Clinton Foundation got special access to you as Secretary of State. Now, that might be coincidence, but, ma'am, I'm from Louisiana. We don't believe in that many coincidences back home. That's what we call a pattern. He pulled out donor lists and meeting schedules. Let's start with the big one. Uranium One. Russia wanted to acquire a Canadian company called Uranium One that controlled about 20% of America's uranium. To do that, they needed approval from several U.S. agencies, including the State Department. Your State Department. Kennedy held up financial records. While this deal was being reviewed, Russian interests connected to Uranium One donated $145 million to the Clinton Foundation. Let me say that again. $145 million from Russians while you were deciding whether to approve their uranium deal. He showed the timeline. Chairman of Uranium One donated millions through his family foundation. Other investors donated millions more. Then there's your husband. In June 2010, while this deal was pending, Bill Clinton was paid $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow. Who paid him? Renaissance Capital, a Russian bank with Kremlin ties that was promoting Uranium One stock. Kennedy looked up. Then your State Department approved the deal. Russia got control of 20% of American uranium. The Clinton Foundation got a $140,000. Bill got $500,000 for a speech, and you want us to believe that's all just coincidence? He pulled out more records. But that's not unique. It's a pattern. Here's a study that found that of the 154 private individuals who met with you as Secretary of State, 85 were Clinton Foundation donors. That's 55% of your private meetings going to people who'd paid your family foundation. Donors contributed a combined $156 million, and they got meetings. That's not access based on policy importance, ma'am. That's pay to play. Algeria, Kennedy continued. They were under restrictions for human rights violations. Then they donated $500,000 to your foundation during a time when foreign government donations were supposed to be prohibited. Shortly after, State Department policy toward Algeria improved. Coincidence? He showed more examples. Swedish telecom company Ericsson was facing pressure from your State Department to stop doing business with Iran. Then they paid Bill $750,000 for a speech and donated to the foundation. The pressure on Ericsson eased. Coincidence? Kennedy pulled out Haiti files. Then there's Haiti. 2010 earthquake. Devastating tragedy. Your foundation raised over $30 million for Haiti relief. You were Secretary of State. Bill was UN Special Envoy to Haiti. The Clintons controlled the response. So where'd that $30 million go? He showed investigative reports. Haitian activists have been protesting for years. They say most of the money went to Clinton cronies, contractors, and companies connected to Clinton donors. Luxury hotel projects for tourists, not homes for Haitians. The Haitian people saw almost none of the money raised in their name. There are literally protests in Haiti with signs saying, "Where did the money go?" Kennedy leaned back and looked at her. But here's the smoking gun, ma'am. After you lost the 2016 election, Clinton Foundation donations dropped 90%. In 2016, when you had power and might become president, the foundation raised $18 million. In 2017, after you lost, it dropped to $2.6 million. By 2020, down to $1.6 million. He let that sink in. Why would donations drop 90% if it's a charity doing good work? I'll tell you why. Because people weren't donating to charity. They were buying access to power. When you had power, money poured in. When you lost power, it dried up. That's not philanthropy, ma'am. That's what the FBI calls a criminal enterprise. Hillary's face was red. The foundation has helped millions of people around the world. Ma'am, Kennedy said with that gentle firmness, the foundation helped you and your husband get rich while you had power. When you lost power, the money stopped. That's not because you suddenly stopped helping people. That's because you had nothing left to sell. You monetized the State Department through your foundation. You sold access. You sold influence. You sold American uranium to Russia. And you called it charity. Even in Louisiana, we'd call that corrupt. And we've had some pretty colorful characters in Louisiana politics. 3 rounds, the Southern gentleman was destroying with a smile. Keep watching. Kennedy's expression shifted. This wasn't folksy anymore. This was serious. Secretary Clinton, I need to show you something. It's from 2011, after Muammar Gaddafi was killed in Libya. CBS News interviewed you. Let me play the clip. The screen showed Hillary arriving for the interview. When told about Gaddafi's death, she laughed and said, "We came, we saw. He died." Then laughed again, clearly delighted with her Caesar reference. Kennedy stopped the video. The room was silent. "Ma'am, you laughed about a man being killed. Now, Gaddafi was a bad man, a dictator, a terrorist, no question. But you laughed. And then, well, let's discuss what happened after you got your way in Libya." He pulled out the policy documents. You were the strongest advocate in the Obama administration for military intervention in Libya. Obama was hesitant. Defense Secretary Gates opposed it. But you pushed hard. You wanted regime change. You wanted this as your foreign policy legacy. You saw it as proof that smart power works. Kennedy showed the timeline. March 2011, NATO starts bombing. October 2011, Gaddafi is captured and killed. You're on TV laughing about it. Then what happened to Libya? He pulled out reports. Libya collapsed into chaos, multiple competing governments, civil war. By 2014, ISIS controlled significant territory, including the city of Sirte. By 2015, Libya became the main launching point for refugees trying to reach Europe. Hundreds of thousands fleeing the disaster you created. Weapons, Kennedy continued. Gaddafi had stockpiles of weapons, including thousands of surface-to-air missiles. They disappeared, spread across North Africa and the Middle East. They ended up in Syria, fueling that civil war. They ended up with terrorist groups. Your intervention didn't just destroy Libya, it destabilized an entire region. He held up humanitarian reports. By 2017, the UN documented open-air slave markets in Libya. Slave markets, ma'am. Black African migrants being bought and sold like cattle in a country you liberated. That's your legacy in Libya. Kennedy's voice got quieter, which somehow made it more powerful. And then you sent Ambassador Chris Stevens into this chaos. You sent him to Benghazi, one of the most dangerous cities in your failed state. He asked for more security. You denied it. And on September 11, 2012, he was killed in an attack that you later lied about. He looked at her steadily. So, let me ask you, ma'am, when did the laughing stop? You laughed when Gaddafi died. Did you laugh when Libya became a failed state? When ISIS took over? When slave markets opened? When your ambassador was killed? At what point did you realize that maybe, just maybe, destroying a country without a plan for what comes next was a bad idea? Hillary tried to respond. Libya was facing a humanitarian crisis under Gaddafi. Ma'am, Kennedy said, his southern courtesy wearing thin. Libya under Gaddafi was stable, not free, not democratic, but stable. They had the highest standard of living in Africa. Now they have slave markets and civil war. The humanitarian situation is objectively worse. You didn't save Libya. You destroyed it. And hundreds of thousands of people died because you wanted a foreign policy victory to put on your resume. He gathered his papers. You had no plan for post-Gaddafi Libya. You just wanted regime change as a trophy. And when it all went to hell, you walked away. That's not leadership, ma'am. That's reckless arrogance. And a lot of people, including Americans, paid the price for your hubris. 4 rounds. Hillary's experience looking more like disasters. More coming. Kennedy took a sip of water and adjusted his glasses. Ma'am, you talk a lot about defending democracy, about how important it is, about threats to democratic norms. So, let's discuss how you treated democracy in your own party's 2016 primary. Because, from what I can tell, you didn't so much win that nomination as purchase it. He pulled out printed emails. July 2016, WikiLeaks published about 20,000 internal Democratic National Committee emails. Now, I know you don't like WikiLeaks, and I understand that. But those emails showed something interesting. The DNC, which is supposed to be neutral in primaries, was actively working to help you and hurt Bernie Sanders. Kennedy read from the emails. DNC Communications Director discussing how to plant negative stories about Bernie. DNC CFO suggesting they attack Bernie's religion in southern states. Use the fact he's Jewish against him. That's the Democratic National Committee planning anti-Semitic attacks to help you. He showed more evidence. Then there's Donna Brazil. She was working for CNN and vice chair of the DNC. She sent you debate questions in advance. Before a CNN town hall, she emailed your campaign the exact wording of a question about the death penalty. Before another debate, she sent a question about Flint's water crisis. You got the questions early. Bernie didn't. When this was exposed, Kennedy continued, CNN fired Brazil. She initially denied it, called it false. Then in 2017, she wrote a book. In that book, she admitted something remarkable. She said she investigated whether your campaign had rigged the nomination, and she found proof. He read from the book. The agreement signed by the DNC and your campaign specified that in exchange for raising money for the DNC, Hillary would control the party's finances, strategy, and all the money raised. Her campaign had the right of refusal of who would be communications director and would make final decisions on all other staff. This was signed in August 2015. Ma'am, before the first debate, before the first vote, you bought control of the DNC a year before the primary started. Kennedy looked at her. That's not a primary. That's a coronation. Bernie Sanders never had a fair shot because you'd already purchased the refs. And when DNC chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz was forced to resign over this scandal, Kennedy said, you know what you did? You hired her. Same day. She resigned in disgrace for helping you cheat, and you gave her a job. That's not distancing yourself from corruption, ma'am. That's rewarding it. He leaned forward. So, explain to me. How do you rig your own party's primary, get caught doing it, and then lecture America about defending democracy? That seems like what we call in Louisiana having some nerve. Hillary tried to defend herself. I won the primary by millions of votes. After getting debate questions in advance, Kennedy interrupted. After the DNC put their thumb on the scale for you. After you bought financial control of the party. After your people attacked Bernie's religion. Ma'am, that's not winning. That's cheating. And you know what happened? Bernie supporters were so angry that many stayed home in November. Some voted third party. Some even voted for Trump. You suppressed your own party's turnout by being too greedy to let democracy work. He shook his head. You couldn't even win a fair primary in your own party. You had to rig it. And now you want us to trust you with democracy. Ma'am, that's asking a lot. 5 rounds. Hillary's democratic principles in tatters. 3 more to go. Kennedy paused. This was delicate territory, but he wasn't going to avoid it. Secretary Clinton, you've positioned yourself as a champion of women's rights. Women's rights are human rights, you famously said in Beijing. Beautiful sentiment. I agree completely. So, I need to ask about something that's bothered me for years. How do you treat the women who accused your husband of sexual misconduct? He pulled out the list. Paula Jones, Jennifer Flowers, Kathleen Willey, Juanita Broderick, Monica Lewinsky. Multiple women accused your husband of sexual harassment, assault, even rape. How did you respond? Kennedy read from news reports. You called them part of a vast right-wing conspiracy. Your advisor, James Carville, said about Paula Jones, drag a $100 bill through a trailer park. You never know what you'll find. That was your team's strategy. Imply they were trash, trailer trash, gold diggers, liars. He looked at her. Juanita Broderick claimed Bill raped her in 1978. She stayed quiet for years out of fear. When she finally told her story, you allegedly approached her at a campaign event and said, I want you to know that we appreciate everything you do for Bill. She interpreted that as a threat, a message to keep quiet. Did you intimidate a rape victim, ma'am? Monica Lewinsky, Kennedy continued. She was 22 years old, an intern. Your husband was President of the United States, 49 years old. That's a massive power imbalance. But when the scandal broke, you didn't believe the young woman. You went on TV and talked about a vast right-wing conspiracy. You blamed everyone, except the man who'd abused his position. He showed clips of Hillary defending Bill, attacking his accusers, claiming political persecution. You spent years destroying these women to protect your political partnership with Bill. Then decades later, during the #MeToo movement, you positioned yourself as an ally. You said we should believe women. Kennedy looked at her steadily. Which women, Secretary Clinton? All women except the ones who accused your husband? That's not feminism. That's selective morality. You believe women when it's politically convenient, and you destroy them when they threaten your power. He leaned back. Here's what everyone knows, but nobody says. You stayed with Bill not out of love. Nobody believes that. You stayed because you needed his political network. He was governor, then president. That gave you the platform. First lady, then senator, because of sympathy over the Lewinsky scandal, then Secretary of State, then presidential candidate. You rode his coattails despite his behavior because your ambition was more important than your principles. You enabled a sexual predator, Kennedy said quietly. When women accused him, you attacked them. When he was caught, you blamed conspiracies. Then years later, you wrapped yourself in #MeToo and claimed to champion women. Ma'am, that's not just hypocrisy. That's betraying every woman who's ever been victimized just to protect your ticket to power. Hillary's voice was cold. My marriage is not. Your marriage is a political arrangement, Kennedy said. Everyone knows it. You stayed because leaving would have ended your career. You needed him more than you needed dignity. And you were willing to destroy other women to keep the arrangement. That's not standing by your man, ma'am. That's sacrificing other women for your ambition. 6 rounds. Hillary's feminist credentials demolished. 2 more rounds. Kennedy pulled out a worn paperback book, Hillary's What Happened. He set it on the table between them. Ma'am, you wrote a whole book about why you lost the 2016 election. I read it. Took me a while. It's 500 pages of blaming everyone except the person responsible. So, let me save folks some time and give you the short version. You lost because voters didn't want you. That's it. That's the whole story. He opened the book to marked pages. In here, you blame James Comey. You blame Russia. You blame WikiLeaks. You blame Bernie Sanders. You blame Jill Stein. You blame sexism. You blame the media. You blame voter suppression. You blame everyone except Hillary Clinton. But let's talk about why you actually lost. Kennedy pulled out campaign data. You called half of Trump supporters deplorables. You actually said that. Basket of deplorables. You insulted tens of millions of Americans for considering voting for your opponent. That's not campaigning, ma'am. That's contempt. And voters noticed. He showed a map. Wisconsin. You didn't visit it once during the general election. Not once. That's a state that had voted Democrat for decades. Your campaign told you to go there. The data showed it was slipping. You ignored them. You thought it was in the bag. You lost Wisconsin by 23,000 votes. Maybe if you'd bothered to show up, you could have found 23,000 votes. Michigan and Pennsylvania, Kennedy continued, same story. You took working-class voters for granted. You figured they'd vote Democrat like always. But they didn't. They voted for Trump. Why? Because he showed up. He talked to them. You talked down to them. He pulled out her Wall Street speeches. You gave speeches to Goldman Sachs and other banks for $225,000 each. You made millions talking to the people who caused the 2008 financial crisis. Then your transcripts leaked, and voters read that you told bankers you have public positions and private positions. You admitted to bankers that you lie to voters, that you say one thing publicly and another thing privately. Kennedy looked at her. Ma'am, that's not sophisticated politics. That's admitting you're dishonest, and voters don't like dishonest. He showed her favorability ratings. You entered 2016 with the highest unfavorability ratings of any Democratic nominee in modern history. Decades of scandals, we've covered most of them tonight, had destroyed your credibility. Most Americans simply didn't trust you, not because of sexism, because of your record. And you know what? Kennedy said. You still might have won, despite all of that. But you ran a terrible campaign. You couldn't articulate why you wanted to be president. Everything was about it being your turn. You'd paid your dues. You'd waited. You deserved it. But ma'am, the presidency isn't about what you deserve. It's about what Americans need. He leaned forward. You came across as entitled, inauthentic, and out of touch. You tried to connect with young people by talking about Pokemon Go to the polls. That's not connecting, ma'am. That's pandering. And bad pandering at that. So you lost, Kennedy said. You lost to a reality TV star with no political experience. And instead of looking in the mirror and asking what you did wrong, you wrote a 500-page book blaming everyone else. That's not reflection, ma'am. That's deflection. He picked up her book. The title is What Happened. I can tell you what happened in one sentence. Voters rejected 30 years of Clinton corruption, entitlement, and dishonesty. That's what happened. And you still can't admit it. 7 rounds. One more. The Louisiana finale. Kennedy sat down his legal pad. For the first time all night, he didn't consult his notes. He'd been waiting for this moment for 30 years. Secretary Clinton, you've been in public life since 1992. That's 32 years. So I've been thinking, what's your legacy? What will history remember about Hillary Clinton? So I made a list. It's long. Bear with me. He started counting on his fingers. Whitewater, Travelgate, the Rose Law Firm billing records that mysteriously appeared in the White House residence after being subpoenaed. The cattle futures trading where you somehow turned $1,000 into $100,000 with no experience. FBI files on political opponents found in the White House. Vince Foster's death and all the questions around it. The missing emails from the Arkansas governor's mansion. Then, as First Lady, Kennedy continued, your health care reform effort that failed so spectacularly that Democrats lost Congress for the first time in 40 years. Your husband's impeachment that you defended by attacking his victims. Your carpetbag Senate run in New York, a state you'd never lived in. As senator, he went on, your vote for the Iraq War that you later regretted when it became politically inconvenient. Your presidential campaign in 2008, where you ran racist ads against Obama, questioned whether he was really a Muslim, and still lost. As Secretary of State, Kennedy's voice got harder. Benghazi, 4 dead Americans, lies to their families, the email server in your basement, 33,000 deleted emails, the Clinton Foundation pay-to-play schemes, Uranium One, Libya destroyed into chaos with slave markets, the Russian reset that made things worse, The Syria red line that Obama drew and you supported that made America look weak when we didn't enforce it. Then 2016, Kennedy continued, rigging the primary against Bernie, getting debate questions in advance, losing to Trump despite every advantage, writing a book blaming everyone but yourself, spending 4 years claiming the election was stolen by Russia, undermining the very democracy you claim to defend. He looked at her steadily. That's your legacy, ma'am. 32 years of scandal, corruption, lying, enabling predators, getting Americans killed, destroying evidence, and selling influence, and never, not once, taking responsibility for any of it. Kennedy's voice got quiet. You know what the pattern is? Rules don't apply to Clintons. You set up a private server? No consequences. You destroy subpoenaed evidence? No consequences. You take foreign money while making policy? No consequences. You rig a primary? No consequences. You lie to Congress? No consequences. You lie to the FBI? No consequences. You lie to families of dead Americans? No consequences. Until November 8th, 2016, he said. That's when you finally faced accountability, not from prosecutors or Congress or the media who protected you, from voters. Regular Americans who looked at 30 years of Clinton corruption and said, no thanks, that was the only real accountability you've ever faced, and you still can't accept it. Kennedy stood up, all 6'1" of him unfolding from his chair. Ma'am, I'm going to be real honest with you now, if you don't mind. Where I come from in Louisiana, we believe in a few simple things. Tell the truth. Keep your word. Take responsibility for your mistakes. Treat people with respect. You've spent 32 years doing the opposite of all of that. You lie, then you lie about lying. You make promises, then break them when convenient. You never admit mistakes. You blame others, and you treat people with contempt, especially the people who work for you, the people who trusted you, and the people you were supposed to serve. His voice got softer, but more intense. You've proven one thing, though. You've proven that if you're rich enough, powerful enough, connected enough, and shameless enough, you can get away with almost anything in this country. Almost. Because there's one thing you can't escape: the voters. And when they finally got their say, they rejected you. Soundly. Completely. Decisively. That wasn't Russia, ma'am. That wasn't Comey. That wasn't sexism. That was Americans who'd watched you for 30 years and decided that they'd seen enough. That was democracy. Real democracy. The kind you claim to defend but actually tried to rig. And democracy said no. Kennedy picked up his legal pad. You came here tonight thinking you'd remind people why you should still be relevant. Instead, you've reminded them why they were right to reject you. Your legacy isn't breaking glass ceilings, ma'am. Your legacy is proving that corruption, even when protected by power and wealth, can still be recognized and rejected by regular Americans who just want leaders who tell the truth and follow the law. He looked at her one last time. I'm just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana. But even I can see that 32 years of scandal isn't bad luck. It's character. And your character has been on display for 3 decades. America has seen enough. The audience erupted, half in thunderous applause, half in stunned silence, all of them having witnessed something rare. A complete dismantling of a political legacy by someone who sounded like he was just explaining why the fish weren't biting. Hillary sat frozen, her famous pantsuit suddenly looking less like armor and more like the emperor's new clothes. She'd come to remind America of her experience. She was leaving as a reminder of why experience without integrity is just experienced corruption. Senator John Kennedy closed his legal pad, adjusted his glasses, and walked off stage with that unhurried Louisiana stride, looking like someone who'd just finished a pleasant conversation about the weather instead of having systematically destroyed 32 years of political mythology. The video went viral at a speed that made social media platforms crash. Within 4 hours, it had 180 million views. Within 12 hours, it was the most watched political content in Internet history. Within 24 hours, even CNN, which had hosted the debate, was playing clips with chyrons like "Clinton struggles with tough questions." But it wasn't the views that mattered. It was the comments. Thousands upon thousands from Democrats saying things like, "I voted for her, but Kennedy is right," and "Why didn't anyone ask these questions before?" and "I feel betrayed." The Louisiana lesson became the name everyone used, not because Kennedy had lectured, he hadn't, but because he taught America something it should have known all along, that Southern manners and devastating truth-telling aren't opposites. Sometimes the nicest thing you can do for someone is tell them the truth they've been avoiding. Hillary's remaining political capital evaporated overnight. The speeches she'd been giving for 250,000 canceled. The book tour she'd planned ended early. The podcast she'd started quietly discontinued. The political commentary gigs, networks suddenly discovered they had enough contributors. But the real damage was to her legacy. For 30 years, she'd crafted an image. First female major party nominee, former Secretary of State, champion of women, experienced leader. Kennedy had dismantled all of it using nothing but her own record, and that Louisiana drawl that made devastating facts sound like friendly advice. The Clinton Foundation, already declining, announced it would wind down operations within 6 months. Donations had dropped 95% after the debate. Nobody wanted to be associated with what Kennedy had called pay-to-play with better PR. Democratic Party leaders found themselves in an awkward position. They'd defended Hillary for years, covered for her scandals, blamed her critics. Now, even their own voters were asking, "Why didn't you tell us?" The progressive wing of the party used the moment to purge Clintonism from Democratic politics. The Clinton way became synonymous with corruption. Senator Kennedy's stature grew, but in a uniquely Louisiana way. He didn't brag. He didn't gloat. When asked about the debate weeks later, he just said, "I asked some questions that needed asking." If folks found that uncomfortable, well, sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. But it's still the truth. His folksy demeanor became a political force. Other Republicans started trying to copy it and failing because you can't fake authenticity. Kennedy's ability to destroy someone while sounding like your friendly uncle giving advice became legendary. Kennedy'd entered the political lexicon, meaning destroyed politely with facts. 6 months later, CNN did a retrospective on the debate. Their own polling showed it had shifted public opinion on Hillary more than any other single event in her career. Not because Kennedy had been mean, he'd been unfailingly polite, but because he'd been thorough, factual, and devastating. The Harvard Kennedy School, no relation, used the debate in its political communication classes as an example of effective rhetoric. "Notice," professors would say, "he never raises his voice. He never insults her personally. He just presents her own record and lets it speak for itself. That's more powerful than any attack." A year later, someone asked Kennedy if he had any regrets about how tough he'd been on Hillary. He thought for a moment, then said in that drawl, "Well, I wasn't trying to be tough. I was trying to be honest. And if being honest about someone's record seems tough, Maybe the problem isn't the honesty. Maybe the problem is the record. That quote got 50 million views. Hillary Clinton largely disappeared from public life. Occasional opinion pieces in friendly outlets. Rare interviews where she'd discuss anything except her record. A quiet retirement in Chappaqua, surrounded by the wealth she'd accumulated through 3 decades of public service. The woman who'd wanted to be remembered as a trailblazer was instead remembered as a cautionary tale. Not about gender, plenty of women in politics were thriving, but about corruption, entitlement, and the dangers of protecting politicians from accountability because of their power or connections. Senator Kennedy went back to Louisiana, back to driving his pickup truck, back to speaking in that drawl that made complicated things sound simple, and simple truths sound profound. He'd done what needed doing, held power accountable with nothing but facts and Southern courtesy. Senator John Kennedy proved something remarkable that night. You don't need to yell to be heard. You don't need to insult to be effective. You just need facts, preparation, and the courage to present them clearly, even when they're uncomfortable, even when they're about powerful people, even when the consequences might be severe. Hillary Clinton represented everything Americans distrust about Washington. Corruption protected by power. Rules that don't apply equally. Scandals that never result in consequences. Lies that are never called lies. 32 years of operating above the law while claiming to serve the public. Kennedy didn't destroy her with attacks or conspiracies. He destroyed her with her own record, delivered in a Louisiana drawl that made it sound like he was just explaining basic facts to someone who should already know them. Share this with everyone who believes in accountability, regardless of power. Comment below. Should there be a statute of limitations on Clinton scandals, or does corruption remain corruption no matter how much time passes? Because Senator Kennedy proved that night what many had suspected for years. The facts about Hillary Clinton were worse than the conspiracies. The documented record was more damning than any theory. And sometimes, all you need to expose corruption is a country lawyer with a legal pad and a drawl. Facts don't care about your pantsuit, your resume, or your political power. They just are. And when someone has the courtesy to present them clearly, even the most powerful people discover that truth is the ultimate accountability. The Louisiana lesson wasn't about politics. It was about character. And in that CNN studio, America learned that character, or lack thereof, eventually catches up to everyone, even Clintons, especially Clintons.